I do this kind of, rocking you're seeing him doing. He was stuck for 9 months in a kind of lumbar spine flexion, pelvis tuck position in the womb. And you notice as we get older, we kind of return to that position. So it lets you know that, hey, if you want to reestablish your spinal curves, do what baby does. Baby's smart. He knows how to develop his lumbar curve, develop his hip flexors, develop his neck strength from crawling and planking. So encourage them, of course, to do this as long as possible. The more they see you doing it, they're going to naturally start to do it as well.
Just as squatting is important, crawling is very important. For Isaiah here,
Baby's in this position, he's learning to use his neck muscles. Eventually he gets strong enough
to use his hip flexors. These guys here, the muscles we've been talking a lot about, the iliopsoas, which are tied to breathing, play a big part in what we're doing here. Now Isaiah, you can see he's keeping his hips pretty low, which means he doesn't have to do a lot of this with his neck, this over hyperextension. He learns to be very neutral. He kind of starts with a lot of extension, and then he works up to lowering his hips. So that's what we want. We want the hips a little bit lower than the neck. And before we get into crawling, because we think about Adam in the garden, he was probably doing a lot of, squatting when he's working on the ground. He probably did a lot of crawling, whether it was playing with animals or just doing general gardening. He would have ended up in this position a lot. And that's great for our hip flexors. There's one rehab exercise we use a lot called the bird dog. And generally I see this exercise done improperly. And if you think about it from like a crawling standpoint, that actually helps a lot. Think about what Isaiah is trying to do here. So we got our feet tucked underneath us. We're in this tabletop position. I never want my hips higher than my head, and I want to keep my hands consistently pushing the ground away. And I'm looking right in between where my hands are. I'm keeping my gaze there. I never want to raise my arms and then do this extension with my neck. I want to keep my neck long. And we'll talk more about the neck in a future video and what the purpose of our neck muscles are and how we just don't use them in our culture. Same with the crawling. It's not seen as something you should be doing, right? You don't see a lot of people running around crawling because it's just generally not perceived as something a modern man should be doing. But crawling and squatting are out of the social norms. The other day I saw a guy out there in a nice flat foot squat gardening. And we need to get back to that because kids do it naturally. They crawl and they squat. He's not in the squatting phase yet, but he's going to get there soon. And encouraging them to stay there is a big thing. Anyways, the bird dog, pressing the ground away and keep my neck long. I'm looking in between my hands. And we're preparing for that cross crawl motion. Cross crawl is when you're using the two hemispheres of your brain at once, left and right. Of course they switch, but let's not get into the weeds here. Let's not get into the grass like Isaiah is. So when I'm raising my right arm and I'm lifting my left leg, I'm using both parts of the brain. Right? We don't have to know where those nerves connect. We just have to know that we're working both. Very good idea. So I'm pressing the ground away, keeping that neck long, which is step one. Keeping hip flexor really tight. We never want to overextend.
These changes in the spinal curve and the pelvis show us that we've lost stabilization, and therefore we'll lose proper engagement of the hip and shoulder joints.
Come up when I do that. So we're keeping that belly tight. I'm consistently holding this press away. Reaching, let's do the opposite side. Holding, and you'll notice you can't raise as far, you can't extend as far. Almost, it's hard to lock out that arm, because when I do, I shrug my shoulders to my ears. We're trying to keep the neck really long, spine really long. It's lengthened and locked in that position. Teaching just the shoulder joint, just the hip joint to work. And then I should be able to bring my fist to my knee.
This is actually an incredibly important step. Pressing the knee into the hand, bringing that knee across midline just a little bit, bringing the foot out a little wider than the knee helps internally rotate the hip. That's going to engage that psoas on that side. So when we do reach, we keep the low back stabilized, core strong.
With a straight elbow. And that lets me know I've pressed far enough away and I've kept my spine stabilized as I should. Let's do that on the other side. Pressing the ground away. The knees are pushing into the ground too. Reaching. Obviously I'm going to hit the baby here, so we'll just skip around him. Able to push. Able to hit that knee into the fist. And then out again.
good little rehab move before we get going. So 10 on each side. If you notice the side was weaker, harder, stiffer, then you'd want to do an extra 10 reps on that side. Then once we get more into the crawling here, which is, Isaiah seems like he's more interested in now, for us, we're going to do this little knee hover plank to start. So after we got good with the bird dog, we're just bringing the knees up. We're not letting our body drop. A lot of people, when they do the bear crawl, they end up kind of going into this position, which isn't bad, but when they do that, it's when it's not so great on the neck. So we're trying to keep that, something we would use. The baby, he's keeping his hips lower than his shoulders and his head. So when we do the crawl, opposite hand, opposite leg, keeping those knees pretty close to the ground, right? Because we don't want to be dragging the knees. Like when he starts, I can hear him squeaking across the floor because he's dragging the knee. But as he gets stronger, he gets prepared to walk, he's able to knee hover. And he's pretty good at his plank. You want to show him a plank? Even when he planks, he keeps his head up pretty high. But he's just preparing. And even before he started crawling, he would do a lot of this planking maneuver. Another thing Isaiah does to mobilize before his knees kind of eventually come underneath the hip joints more. When he first starts out, they're kind of wide. Because you'll notice if you're doing kind of this child pose rock, hits you more in the low back. We want to be hitting into the hips. So if we get wide enough with the knees, and I do this kind of, rocking you're seeing him doing, he was stuck for 9 months in a kind of lumbar spine flexion pelvis tuck position in the womb. So he's helped me a lot in my understanding and learning. But getting that rocking going, kind of that planking stage, and then he would get into this kind of wide knee. We can finally point the feet on this one. It's generally how he does it. But as he gets stronger, I think he's going to start using those shin muscles to tuck those feet in. And I'll have to encourage him more on that. But he would just rock, opening up those hips, getting those hips to move. Like I said, for here, it's the low back. And people think, oh, I have great hip mobility. Is it your hips or is it your pelvis and your spine that are generating that? And that's the tricky part for a lot of cheerleaders or gymnasts is they end up using the spine, sacroiliac, pelvis. Why are we going for the tire? More than the actual hip sockets themselves. So widening them, and you'll notice there's a stiffness in the hip sockets. That's what we're going for. Trying to loosen that up. So when he's doing that initial kind of rocking phase, he's getting those hips to work, loosening up those joints, and that's going to help him develop that strength, that crawling, that spinal curve, but also the brain development. When we get diseases like Parkinson's, we're losing a lot of that motor control, especially in the cerebellum. And we can create new neural pathways by simply continuing to challenge our body. They always like, well, do Sudoku puzzles and all that. But also movement is going to help create new neural pathways, because since we've got so much degradation going on and decay of those neural pathways, we want to keep challenging the body, keep testing our balance. And that's just across the board for anyone with our brains and everything that's going on. It's mental health and all that. Doing manual labor, getting out, if you don't have a manual labor job, supplementing by crawling around, do it out in your backyard where no one can see you. Learning to squat, that's all going to help your brain development in the long run. Just like as he is developing, we can fix ourselves by changing how we're moving, changing how we're breathing. Movement takes pressure off the nerves, heals all the organ systems, including the brain. So next time we'll talk about the neck, and one thing a lot of cultures do with their heads, how they use their heads, and how we just don't. So this has been your crawling, primal crawl. I believe it's something that adults have done and use, and probably still use in other cultures, which really helps stabilize the spine, changes our breathing, encourages more hip motion. So we're working through maybe some of that rocking for you. If the crawl is too much on your body right away, just working through that rock motion, maybe for a week, working on your bird dogs at the same time.
Hitting a couple of those, 10 each side. Trying to find, okay, that feels a little stiffer. Fighting for that stiffness. It's not about speed. Getting the breath work going. Inhaling, exhaling. Stabilizing that spine. You want it shaky. And when Isaiah first started planking, I would notice that he'd plank and his left hip would drop. So a lot of us have that same posture I see when we're standing. We kind of sway, the other pelvis raises up, and we get these weird rotations and imbalances in the hips, and that spirals up the chain into the neck, causes a lot of issues because most of our issues are ground up. Imbalances in the hip causes knee, feet issues, but also lower back, mid-back, neck issues even from what our hips are doing, because it's a main mover of the body. Even if you're sitting all day, you're still going to be twisted when you're sitting. So we got to work on that. We're climbing daddy. We're not climbing daddy. It's not the exercise of the day. It's crawling. So I had to coach him through a lot of working that hip. He didn't want to bring that left foot forward, but he's pretty much evened himself out just through a little bit of coaching and guidance. But you can check that same stuff out on yourself. And one thing I like is, yes, the bird dog, but once you've gotten into this kind of knee hover plank, you can just tap. For me, it's a little stiffer going this way. So just focusing on more of those right knee across midline motions. Feet are tucked in our dorsiflexion pattern, working on mobilizing one hip over the other. So you're just trying to feeling for the bind, not what hurts, what feels stiffer, weaker, a little more awkward. That's what we're trying to normalize. When we start crawling, if that pelvis is dumping instead of the spine staying strong, you're going to start mobilizing your low back too much when you're doing exercises. And we want to keep it in the hips. That's the whole point of this bird dog, is to teach spinal stability. The spine is lengthened and locked, so it's not doing a lot of movement. They don't want to see your butt, they want to see your face. You're the cuteness factor here. We're locked and lengthened. Very good, thanks. There's the plank. 1 second of it. Let's do a little crawling. Want to join me? So knees are just hovering, trying to keep that spine lengthened and locked. You can tie your breathing into that if you want. Good. Inhalers, we're moving. Whatever you need to do. It's also going to encourage that kind of diaphragmatic breath. In foundation training, we call it the decompression breath, which is more of working expansion into the back of the ribs than expanding the front of the ribs, which we've already talked about in episode 2 a lot. Keeping that core tight, especially when I'm hovering the knees, it automatically hits you there in that stomach. You're going to be sore. Feel like you do a lot of crunches just from crawling. You can also reverse this too. And it just hits that pattern both ways. Again, keeping that head up. You're looking at the ground, trying to keep your hips kind of low. The knees are just grazing the grass, just like Isaiah is grazing on the grass. Grass grazer.